All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our Civil Rights Training webinar. My name is Jackie Johnson and I'm the Training and Communications Coordinator with the State WIC office. Today we have Marge Blankenship, our Clinic Services Coordinator, here to provide our annual Civil Rights Training. This is a topic that's very important to everyone who works in WIC, and it's also actually a requirement of the program that everyone attends this training. To ensure everyone has opportunity to attend a civil rights training session, Marge will be repeating this training again on September 17th. Both sessions will be recorded. If your staff are unable to attend either one of the live sessions, we will also be sending out the recordings for the sessions, so feel free to have them watch one of those as well if that's needed. We will use the best of the recordings to train future staff over the year. We generally put a link to this training on the pre-training checklist for any new staff that need trained after, we give the training for this year. That way everybody can stay caught up on their training. A copy of the slides and handouts were attached to the calendar invite and were emailed out yesterday. If you didn't get those slide packets, please check with your WIC director in case you were missed on the email. Please do hold all of your questions until the end of the presentation. Marge has quite a bit of things to cover, so we want to make sure that we get through all of the content. At that time, you can unmute yourself and ask questions verbally, or you can certainly type them in the chat if you prefer to do it that way. Any questions that we don't get to, in the allotted time, will be answered in an email following the webinar. And we do ask that you please stay on for the entirety of the training and do complete the evaluation sometime afterwards, and we will also want you to put your name in the chat before you leave as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Marge for her to talk to us all about civil rights.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad you all joined me today because we have a lot of information, or I have a lot of information to share with you. And as Jackie mentioned, this is required by USDA that we do this and that you have this training every year. I do want to say before I get started, I know I just sent these slides out yesterday morning, but I did make some changes between then and now. So if you have the slides in front of you, or you printed them out, or you've got them pulled up on your screen, the ones that I sent, don't be alarmed if there are a few places where I've either moved some things around or deleted some slides. So what you have is not necessarily going to look exactly like what is going to be on the screen today. So I just want to give you a heads up. It's not that your copy, that something's missing or that you messed up something with your copy. If you notice that things are, that there's some, just move. Most times if you just click move down, if you've got it on the screen, either flip the page or move down one slide on your screen and you should be right back on track. So that being said, we're going to start. So the first piece with all of this is, I get asked many, many times, what does the civil rights have to do with WIC? And really why we have to be concerned about civil rights and why we have the rules for WIC is because WIC receives federal funds, and therefore anyone that we have to comply with all those civil rights rules and regulations, because any program or agency that receives any money from the federal, that is federal money, then we have to agree or have to comply with all of that. So your local, you guys not everyone deals with this, with their local agency agreement, but if that's more your agency administrator and your WIC directors, then this is an agreement that they sign every year, and it has a civil rights assurance statement, and that says that the local agency will comply with all of those civil rights requirements, and we're going to talk about most of those in the next hour and a half, 2 hours. So you will be aware of what that all means, but you're not one of them. You don't have to worry about signing it. But one of the requirements is, as Jackie mentioned, and I had said, is a year that there has to be a yearly training. So today's training and your attendance will count for that requirement. So as I go through all of this today and as you learn things, you will, when we're finished, you will know how to collect racial and ethnic data about your participants. You'll know what the public notification policy is and how to apply it. And you will also know how to follow the complaint procedures. You will, some of the other things that you will know by the end of the training is how you will understand what the provisions are for providing accommodations for persons with disabilities and how to meet those. You will be able to apply the language assistance policy that to any limited English proficient persons that you encounter at your clinics. And you will also be able to recognize and practice good customer service when working with interpreters. And the last thing that you will know after the training today is you will be able to describe all the protections provided for faith-based organizations whose facilities are used as WIC clinics. So that's a lot. And as I said, there's a lot of information to share, and we will get through it all, and you will have your training for the year. So the first topic to address all of those things is talking about the civil rights training, which is exactly what we're doing right now, is what you're attending. And I'm going to talk about the civil rights training and how that meets or what the requirements are. So every WIC staff person has to attend a civil rights training at least one time every year. And this, as I said, is your yearly training. And after today, you'll have met that requirement for this year. Now that is the fiscal year, not the calendar year. So this is for fiscal year 2025. Now starting in October, we will be in fiscal year 2026, and sometime between October 1st and September 30th of next year, you will have to go through the training again. So yeah, they it's a yearly thing. So who does the requirement for the training apply to? It applies to everyone who works for the WIC program. Those who work this means those who work in the clinics, vendor managers, those that work with the stores, the local agency directors, outreach workers who work with WIC participants and schedule appointments and things like that. It would apply to them also. It also includes all of the new WIC staff too, and they have to complete a civil rights training or this training before they can begin working with participants. Volunteers who work with WIC participants, such as students or interns, also need to attend or have the training. And for local agencies that subcontract with another agency or entity to provide WIC services, like they might contract with a federal health center in their area to provide WIC services at that location. Those staff must also that work with WIC at that subcontracted site also have to be trained. And it needs to be done, and it has the same requirements once a year. Next slide. So here is the requirements that USDA requires that the yearly civil rights training include. And as you can see, there's a long list of things that they require. I'm not going to go through all of them because we're going to talk about all of them as we move through the rest of the information for today. But as you can see, there's a lot of these. For those, I want to let you guys know, for those of you that have heard this before, I'll try to keep it from being too boring. And for those of you who are hearing this for the first or second time, yes, every year we have to cover those same bullets. So bear with me, and we'll get through it. So talking about now, how do we do this training in Nebraska? And here in our state, for WIC, we normally provide the training in two different parts. Part one includes all of those bullet points on the left here. And those really pertain, as I think of it, to all the laws and the regulations and the requirements. So that's part one. It's policy, it's, procedural things. Part two is a customer service or conflict resolution topic. And normally, we here at the state office provide this part during our WIC conference in the years when we have one, or in the years when we don't have one. The local agency is responsible for providing part two. Now, there are times where we will provide part two. And this training today, I've built enough things into it that it will count for part one and part two. So it's like we can ring the bell and say, we got it all taken care of today. And you won't have to do any additional training or civil rights training, customer service in order to meet this requirement. Okay. Now, again, this is just for this year, for 2025. So the next big area or bullet that we have to talk about is the civil rights and discrimination. So you're probably wondering, well, how does this apply to me in my job? How does all of this stuff apply? And there really are many, many rules and laws and regulations pertaining to civil rights that do apply to WIC, because WIC, again, is funded with federal money. So here's a list. Again, it's a long list of all of the different regulations, laws, rules that apply to WIC that we have to follow, where it says, you need to do this or that, and we have to, as a program, because of receiving all that federal money, have to follow all of those. And it looks kind of overwhelming, doesn't it? I don't blame you for thinking about that. I'm like, I think so. But, no, you're thinking about, oh man, I really hope I don't have to read all this. And no, you don't need to read all of it, because myself and others, we get to do that here at the state office. And then we take all of the information in this list, and we turn those into procedures and figure out how we're going to comply with those here in Nebraska within our program. And then we turn those into procedures and tell you that, hey, this is how we're going to meet them. So, but let's take a quick look at a couple of these, just to give you an example of how some of this works. If you look beside each one of these in blue, it does say what parts, what it addresses, because each of these does not address the same things. There are different laws and different rules or regulations for all of the different types of or bases and categories that fall under civil rights. So each one of these, if you ever are interested and you want to get more information on, say, sexual rules or rules around sex, then you could look at the Title IX of the Education Amendment. And talking about that one, Title IX says that education providers, and that's like universities, public schools, have to provide equal access to the sexes. And I'm going to share something with you. I'm dating myself, but I'm old enough to remember when myself and some other girls in my high school, we wanted to play basketball so bad. I loved basketball. I still love basketball. I wanted to play. We went to the school administration every year for about 3 years to request them and say, hey, we want a girls basketball team here. We think our school should have a girls basketball team. And we got told, nope, you can't have a team. And we'd say, but why? We got enough people, we got enough girls, because we had quite a few girls that wanted to play basketball. And they told us, and this is exactly what they told us, is nope, girls don't play basketball. Girls can't play basketball, which was very disappointing and really just broke some of our hearts because we really wanted to play basketball. And you would not see that today, or because schools are required by this law and to be able to play, they have to provide equal. If they have a basketball team for boys, they got to have a basketball team for girls. And so that's a big change. But many years ago, that wasn't a fact. And then it took a while, even though this was done in 1972, it took a while before all of the schools complied or they had to comply. So some of these, the dates that are on these, don't mean that they went into effect immediately. There were times or a period of time on these where it took a while before they had to comply. And as you'll notice, there's more than one of these that affects or addresses disability. And all of those provide rules to be sure that people with disabilities have the same access as able-bodied people. And one example that I think most of us see every day that we don't even think about because they've been that way or been around for so long is the curbs. When you get to a curb at a corner, it has that cutout area or that sloped area where people, you don't have to step off the whole curb. That is part of one of the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act that said they had to do that to make those street corners accessible for people in wheelchairs so they could cross the street without help, or someone who was on crutches or had a prosthetic leg or foot or something to make those things easier for them. So there's a lot of these things that we don't even think about. They're just part of our everyday life, and that's one of the examples. The WIC regulations, which are listed closer to the bottom, they pull in all of the things, or a lot of these things, into the WIC regulations. So they're not only in these laws and rules that we see here, but they're also in our regulations. Next slide, Jackie. So I said, we go through these, and that's my job, is to figure out all this or know these things and then put them into policies and procedures for you so you can use them at the clinics without having to know or be familiar with what's in or what all of those actual regs say. And here is a list of all of the procedures and a link. So all of these procedures are out on our website, the state website, and these are all of the different procedures. There are procedures that cover guidance and guidelines for the overall civil rights rules, for services and serving disabled persons, what is and how to use the non-discrimination statement, how to collect that required data that USDA says we have to collect, and then also there are rules or guidance in these procedures of how to do complaints. So they cover a wide variety. So anytime you have any questions or you want more detail, just hop out to the website and check these out, because all of the information you'll need will be in these procedures. And if you get stuck or can't find something, just reach out to me. Next slide. So here at the state, we also provide several different resources for your use, because again, there's so much. So one of the things that we do provide is a quick guide to civil rights. It's a job aid, and you'll see that here on the left. It was also provided as a handout so that you can use it at your clinic or at your desk. It is meant to be a quick reference for the rules WIC needs to follow. So this is just a general quick reference that you can refer to of the general rules that WIC must use or must follow out at the clinics. The second thing that we have is our Learning About WIC and the training clinic. And as I've already said, all new staff need to have training on civil rights before they can work with participants, before they can even start working with participants. And all of that is covered in the Learning About WIC and the training center when they come to the training center for their training. So all of that is done and everybody's ready when they come back or come back from the training center. They've got all that civil rights information. And then the last thing that we provide, and Jackie mentioned this, is the civil rights training video. We record the training that I do every year. We send that out to all of the directors so that they can use it, and anyone that's not able to attend live is able to watch it so they can meet the, their training requirement. But then we use that video with all the new staff throughout the rest of the year to help them meet the training requirement that USDA has. So those are the different tools that we have. So now we're going to talk about what is discrimination. It's we're going to move into the nitty-gritty of the civil rights. So when most people hear civil rights, they immediately think discrimination, but they may not know what that means or really what that is. And discrimination, there's a definition here. It's when a person or a group of people are treated differently than everyone else. And this can be done intentionally, can be done just by neglect. They don't really realize they're doing it, or it can happen because of some unintended side effects of innocent seeming actions, of actions they took that there were, side effects they didn't think about. So there's a lot of these regulations and rules cover a whole bunch of things, but there are 6 what are called protected bases that we cannot discriminate against, or that we have to, that apply to WIC. And those 6 bases are race, color, national origin, age, sex, and disability. So keep in mind that there may be other places, there may be other federal programs that get federal dollars that there are other things that they have to not do, or I shouldn't say not do, that they have to comply with. But WIC, we only have to do these 6. So I think most of you have heard about these, or at least some of them. So how do people discriminate against people in these 6 different bases or 6 classes? They can do it intentionally, which means you know what you're doing, you meant to do it, and that is known as disparate, disparate/intentional, because you meant to do it. Then the next type of discrimination is what they call a disparate impact or effect, and this is usually unintentional. And that's the one I was talking about just a minute ago, about how you may put in place a process or a procedure, or you may do something that you don't even think about. You think you're doing the right thing, but it has a effect on a group of people or certain people that you didn't expect or you didn't think about. And so that's really unintentional. You really didn't mean it. The third type of discrimination is retaliation for prior civil rights activity. And this is prohibited also. And this means when you retaliate because an applicant or a participant or someone, it could be a family member of theirs, it could be somebody, a friend, helps with they either made a report or they helped with a civil rights investigation. And this also includes any of our local agency or clinic staff. If they're asked and about something, USDA follows up and on a report and asks about their questions or what they saw, and they give them that information, which you should. It says that no one can retaliate against you for helping with that. So those are the different types of discrimination, and some examples that we've seen over the years, actually in WIC clinics, or that could happen, are Some of the examples are segregated appointment schedules. Having appointment schedules for certain groups of participants is not allowed and can be seen and actually is considered a civil rights violation. It's this considered discrimination. Differences in waiting times. This is one we hear about a lot. Somebody will be sitting in the waiting room and they come and say, well, or they will tell us, well, I was discriminated against because I had to wait. Well, they might have been 30 minutes early for their appointment. And they had, but they thought they should get in as soon as they came in. But that's really not discrimination. But if you consistently make or have participants of a certain class or group have to wait long times or wait longer than others for waiting for their appointment or to be seen, that can definitely be seen as a discriminatory practice. And also treating people disrespectfully. Again, I use this and don't do this, but if you're treating everybody grumpy for that day and you're just having a bad day and you're grumpy and you're treating everybody, then that's not necessarily discrimination. But if you're always very short or rude with people from a certain group, or those, say, someone who the participants that speak Somali, that can be seen as discrimination. And it really is, because you're treating one group differently than another. Then also one thing, and I don't think we've ever done this, and we've never had this happen, but it wanted to bring it to your attention, is we can't provide a different level or a different amount of benefits to one person or to people based on who they are or what group they are from, or what language they speak. So again, that's something that, I don't think we've ever had that problem. We've never had it happen, but it is something I just wanted to make you aware of. Clinics inaccessible to people with disabilities. That includes whether they have mobility problems, sight, hearing, or other conditions. That would be intentional. That's an intentional. Your clinic is inaccessible for these people, and somebody made the decision and usually that's something that when those requests come to me or the application, that's one of the things I look at. So we've not really ever had this either, but it would be considered intentional discrimination. If you require participants to bring their own interpreter or use a family friend or their children, again, that can be seen as intentional, because the WIC rules say that we cannot require participants to provide their own interpreters, and we should not use children as interpreters either. Another one is requesting extra verification or documentation from some people based on being in one of those protected classes. So, you make them provide an extra ID, for example. Everybody just normally provides one proof. You make them provide two, because you just want to be sure that they're who they say they are. We can't do that, and that would be seen also as a protected or as an intentional. Now the thing that, excuse me, so, that is the way, that is those are all intentional, something that we just all need to be aware of. Next slide. Failing, a couple more examples. Failing to provide a person that has limited English proficiency, that an interpreter will be provided by the clinic at no cost to them. That, again, is an intentional type of discrimination, because WIC is required, and we are all required, when someone where English is not their first language and who has difficulty speaking, and not just speaking, but understanding English, and that could be understanding the verbal or written. So it could be either one. They may speak very well, but they may not understand the written. They may have great difficulty. They may not read English. So keep all that in mind, think about that. But that would be seen as intentional, because we are required to tell people that are participants or an applicants that we will provide an interpreter for them if they request it at no cost to them. And then another example is if you're locating or you located your WIC clinic in an area that's not accessible to people in a certain minority group, or it's due to lack of there's no public transportation, or one example is you serve an area that you have a lot of refugees in and you put the clinic right next to a police station. Many people who come from countries as refugees, a lot of times those were police states, so they are very scared and very, very unlikely to go anywhere that's close to the police. So if you put your clinic right next to the police station, the odds are a lot of those refugee families are either not going to come to the WIC clinic at all, or they're going to be very hesitant about doing that. So those are just some things that isn't really, that would be not an intentional, it'd be unintentional, because most likely you didn't, unless you did it on purpose to minimize the number of people of refugees that you're serving. But in most cases, it's just something unintentional. We didn't think about it. So you can see there's lots of situations that could seem to be discriminatory and some that are, that we just don't think about. So keep that in mind. And there's lots more. Those are just some of the more common or some of the more likely ones. So we talk about not being discriminatory. So we talked about all those things that are discrimination. Well, what are some things that we see here at WIC and that I've heard over the years that are really not discriminatory? And one of the complaints that I've gotten in the past, over the years, is someone tells me, they refused to allow my son to sign up for WIC. The son was 6 years old. And this is not discrimination because the federal requirements for WIC say we only serve children to age 5. Now, they may think it is because we're not serving their child, but truly it is not discrimination because of the age. Another thing I've experienced is that WIC does not provide benefits to men who are not pregnant, who did not just have a baby, or who are not breastfeeding. Yes, we're not breastfeeding. Get that right. And this isn't discrimination. But believe it or not, we have had men complain that we won't enroll them in WIC. Well, if they don't meet one of those categorical qualifications, then we can't serve them because, again, the regs only allow us to serve pregnant and breastfeeding or postpartum, and also children up to the age of 5. So the regs overrule some of those things. Also, again, another one that we get, haven't had this one for a while, but have gotten complaints because, well, my sister, is on WIC and she's getting tuna, or she gets this many dollars of fruits and vegetables, but I only get this. Well, the sister is pregnant or maybe breastfeeding versus the other one who is, just a not breastfeeding mom. And so you have to explain, well, it's the rules. It isn't, and that isn't discriminatory. But you may hear that over the years. As you work with WIC, you may have to explain that to people. Next, I'm going to talk about race or data collection. This will include why we have to ask those ethnicity and race questions that we have to ask all of our participants. WIC must collect information about race and ethnicity for all of those who are potentially eligible in the areas that we serve and all of our applicants and participants at their clinic. So in Nebraska, we collect the race and ethnicity data when someone applies to WIC. So that's why, as you all know, it's their first appointment, one of the first things we ask them is about their race and ethnic background. And I get asked again a lot, why do we have to ask for this? And what? And then I get other things I hear is, well, what does anyone do with this anyway? Well, I want to talk about that for a second. The race and ethnic data that we collect for our WIC participants is reported to USDA periodically. So we are not the only ones that use that information. USDA, they are the ones that require it, and they are the ones that use it. And they use that information that we send to them to determine, are we reaching the potential eligible people in Nebraska that, are we reaching all of them, or are we missing our targets? They also use the data to select locations to visit when they come and do their management evaluations of the state. So they look at those numbers. The data that you collect from your participants is used by us here at the state WIC office to complete required FNS reports, because we do have to send data and information and reports into FNS on a yearly basis. Some of the things are more often than that. And we also use them to help identify when additional outreach may be needed in different parts of the state. WIC collects racial and ethnic data by asking our participants to self-identify. So, we ask them, you all know that, you do that every day, and you need to inform those applicants or participants that you're asking this information from that WIC collects that information for statistical purposes only, and that the information will not have any effect on their eligibility for WIC or the benefits that they get from WIC. So we need to let them know that information. Race and ethnicity is collected by asking these two questions. Now, I think you're all aware of that. And then you enter that information into Journey. Always ask the ethnicity question first, and then follow it by asking what race they identify with. And they can choose more than one race. We don't see that a lot, but if someone wants to, it is acceptable, and Journey allows them to do that. Then the ethnicity choices for WIC are Hispanic or Latino, and then the second one is not Hispanic or Latino. And this question's pretty straightforward for the participants to answer. That's usually easy, and you get a direct answer and enter it into Journey. Next slide, Jackie. The second question, which is about what race do you or your child identify with, can pose some difficulty for some of our participants, especially those who identify as Hispanic or Latino. And I think many of you, a lot of you, have experienced this. The 5 races that WIC allows for or uses for identification are American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and then white. So those are our 5 race categories. Next slide. Last year, we expanded the definition of who each of the 5 races included. We provided that to help out because staff struggled, clients struggled. Where do I fit in all of these? So try to expand that, and I hope that helped. I've gotten some good feedback from some staff saying that it really has helped, especially for them to know, but also for participants to kind of know when they're not quite sure what they should choose or where they fit. It's been helpful. So again, I really hope that it was helpful to everyone. That was our intent. But next slide. So again, one of the things we get that I hear, especially from new staff, once they get out to clinic and they're like, oh man, why these categories? Why do we only have, or how come we have these race categories? Well, first, it's required by USDA that we use these races. They don't give us any options. Also, all the programs that receive federal money must use the same categories, which are the same categories that the census uses. And the reason they require this is to allow for the data that they collect. Because remember I said we have to send this information to FNS USDA periodically. And they take that data, and all these other programs have to do the same thing, whether to USDA or HHS or, any of these other programs or agencies within the federal government. And they collect all of that from all these programs and agencies, and it needs to be consistent so they can show who's using the programs, how effective is the program or programs, and how well are they serving the eligible population in their area. The area could be the state, it might be a region. It also, we get data that shows nationally. Well, if everybody was using a different list of races, it would be really hard to get numbers or get information that we could really use. It wouldn't be effective and essentially would be a waste of everybody's time. So we have a racial categories tool. This is a job aid, and you can use this with new applicants to help those who are having some difficulty deciding what race to choose. And this is what it looks like. There is a link. It's on the website. So you can pull this up and print it out. The table of contents, it's available in multiple languages. You can see those here. And if you click on each of those languages in the table of comments, it will take you directly to that tool for that language. So yes, and I want to say thanks to Jackie because I provided the detail or the information, and she made this wonderful with the links and everything. So she did. I love it. I think it's really good link, and you may not be aware that this is available, and you can definitely, anyone can access it and use it. What this tool does, or what each of these does, is they contain information about each race and the area of the world or country that apply to each of those races. So as you can see in the middle and on the right-hand side, that is where the detail is, and this is showing the English version. As I said, it's available on the WIC website for any one of you that would like to go look at it or would like to use it. It does contain all of those different languages, which you might not been able to read that, but the languages that it is available in are Spanish, Arabic, the Karen Myanmar, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Pashto, and Somali. And also English, but those are the other languages. And as I said, each of these gives suggestions for the countries that might be included in that race that you can use with your participants when they're needed. So, and you may not need to with everyone, but it's a really nice tool to have when you have issues. Next slide. So what can you do when you have somebody who's reluctant to choose a race? And I'm sure you never experienced that. I'm joking, of course, because I know it happens fairly often. First, let them know that we only, again, as I talked about, we only ask for the information for statistical purposes, and that how they answer is not going to affect their eligibility for WIC, or it's not going to affect what foods that they will get. That has nothing to do with how they answer. And sometimes it's just helpful to let them know there's really no right or wrong answer. We don't care what they say. It doesn't matter to us. There is no right or wrong answer. Next slide. And then sometimes you have an applicant who truly doesn't know what to choose. They really can't figure it out. And you can help them by asking like where their family or they or their family came from. And then based on what they tell you, you can make some suggestions using those charts. Again, let them know that if they cannot or don't want to choose, that you will have to choose for them, because we do have to enter something in. We have to enter a race. And usually the ethnicity, as I said, isn't the issue. It's the race. And I think you guys can all agree with that. And then again, and then sometimes again, it's just, you tell them again, repeat that, again, that their answer is not going to affect their eligibility or the foods that they get, and that there's no right or wrong answer. Sometimes they just need to hear it again. And, but if you have to identify they don't, and you have to identify, then you put in what you think. There is, again, for staff, there's no right or wrong answer. So don't struggle. Don't worry about what you're going to put in. Just look. Maybe they've already told you some information as you were talking to them about and asking some of these questions. And then you have a sense for what might be a good race or a good option to choose. And then choose that and move on. Don't stress. Don't worry that you might choose the wrong answer either, because there is really no right or wrong answer. Next slide. Limited English Proficiency, or LEP as it's known, is part of the national origin sections of the civil rights laws and regs. And a lot of people don't realize that, but it does follow it. So when you see something referred about national origin, that's where this falls into. Next slide, Jackie. And there are the LEP requirements for WIC require that states have to take reasonable steps to allow persons with limited English proficiency have the same access to information as those who English is their native or first language. So we have to make an effort to allow someone where English is not their first language to have the same understanding and the same access to the information that we provide at WIC as anyone who speaks English, or whose English not just speaks, but who really understands it and whose English that's their original or first language. Next slide. Each WIC agency must consider each of these points or things when determining if they need to provide language assistance for applicants and participants in their clinics or that come to their clinics. First one is the number and proportion of limited English persons that you serve or who you encounter. So it's not just those that you serve, it's those that you encounter in the eligible population in the counties you serve. So you have to look at the potential eligible also numbers. Then the second one is, how often do you have a limited English person who speaks that language or from that country contact your program or your clinic? The third one is, how important is the service that WIC provides? Well, they're pretty important. So that one, we already know the answer to that. They're important. And then 4, what resources are available? What resources might need to be developed? And what is the cost? So if the cost is exorbitant, then maybe you don't have to provide any resources. But there's a lot of different ways to provide that information, and you really need to look at all of those also in conjunction with the number of people that you're serving or that you could potentially serve. The one thing to always keep in mind about the cost is it cannot be the only or the determining factor when you're deciding whether to provide language assistance or not. So it cannot be the overriding or the only reason why you wouldn't provide assistance or some kind of resources. So always keep that in mind, because if you do that and someone complains or does a complaint, you probably are going to be found by USDA to have discriminated against those folks or those participants or potentially eligible folks. Next slide. So how do we meet those LEP requirements that I just talked about? WIC materials must be provided in Spanish across the state. We have enough Spanish-speaking participants and residents of our state that we have to do Spanish. That's a requirement. Other languages are provided as needed, and that's going to vary based on your clinics, your service areas, the counties, those things. So that is something that's determined at the agency and clinic levels. We use written translation of forms and materials, and that's one of the ways we meet those requirements. The state currently provides materials used in certification in 7 languages in addition to English. And we are working on potentially adding more and getting all those out to you guys for use in the clinics. So those things like that will be coming in the next few months. You should also have the availability of bilingual staff or interpreters or the language lines to provide translation at your clinic. And the number of people that you encounter or that you serve that speak a certain language is obviously going to impact or affect whether you hire someone who speaks that language to work in your clinics, or whether you use, maybe you have, you see 1 or 2 a year, so you use the language line. And that's perfectly fine. Everyone does not have to use the same methods. It really is, again, that fits into that determining how many people speak that language or need that assistance in your areas that you serve, or that you actually have participants who have those needs. And that is going to vary in different parts, depending on where you live in the state and even the clinics. And also, WIC has to follow, this is something new, the Notice of Availability of Language Assistance Services. This is something new, and it means the language assistance services is for verbal, written, and also our websites. Next slide, Jackie. So we'll talk about that in a little bit here, but this is a new tool that I sent out, and it is also on our website. It is a desk aid or a tool that when you have a client come up to you, or come to the desk, or come to the clinic, and you don't speak the language, or you're having trouble knowing what language it is, you can take this, have this at your desk or the counter, and you can show that to them. And if they read their language, they can go down it and they can point to which of those languages on that sheet they speak. And that's just a good tool to help you figure out, because we don't always know, we don't always recognize the languages, especially if we're not exposed to them all the time. So this is a good tool. It also has sign language up in the corner on the right-hand top, and Braille. So if you have someone who needs Braille or sign language, they can point to those. So just a new tool that, you probably should keep at your desk, especially the clerks at the front area, and use those and use it. So as we're talking about all this LEP and limited English, I wanted to share some information. I wanted to share some information with you about Nebraska. And did you know that Nebraska has over 133,000 foreign-born people who live in our state? That's a lot. I mean, it was like, wow, I knew we had a lot, but seeing that number, it's like, just kind of makes it real. And foreign-born person is considered anyone who's not born a U.S. citizen at birth. So this 133,000 and more, includes anyone who weren't born here but became a citizen. So this is people who were not born here, irregardless if they're now a citizen or not. Of those, and that 133,000 plus people represents 7% of our state population, and it's across the state. So I wanted to share that with you because I think that's really important when we think about all these languages and the clients that we see and that we serve. There are lots and lots of countries that are represented by those who are foreign-born. The top ones from the areas of the world are Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And you can see the numbers here. And then next slide. And then the other thing is that with the diversity, there's a lot of diversity in our state. And obviously, People from all over the country. And again, a number that really surprises me is that there are 98 languages spoken in the state of Nebraska in addition to English. And as you can see here, there's numbers for the top ones, like what percentage of the total, but then there's also numbers that kind of give you an idea of how many people that translates to. So we have a lot of diversity, and as you probably see in your clinics. And this is just a comparison of the top 10 languages that are spoken in Nebraska on the left-hand side, those that are spoken or that are documented in the spoken language field for Nebraska WIC participants in Journey. And this was as of this month. And then on the right-hand side, far right-hand side, are the top 10 languages that staff identified to me last August that they said were the most common languages they saw in their clinics. So as you can see, some of these are repeated. They may not be in the exact order, but some of these are repeated in all three columns, and others are not. But yeah, just to give you a sense, I wanted to share that information with you. So knowing all of that different information that I just shared, and all of those languages and people being from all over the world, almost every WIC clinic is going to need to use an interpreter at one time or another. And there are some general tips and hints to know what to allow you to work, or to know that will help you work more effectively with an interpreter, and to provide the best experience, not only for you, but the participant and the person who's translating. And I think, there are some staff who use translators constantly every day at the clinic. And then there's others that maybe only a couple times a year. And so there's a big difference in the expertise and the comfort level. So working with interpreters, there are some things to keep in mind, some tips. And the first one is be sure and allow enough time when scheduling an appointment when you need to work with an interpreter. Most people will agree that work with interpreters all the time will tell you that an agreement or an appointment using an interpreter will take 2 or 3 times the amount of time in this appointment that's in the staff person's native language. So if you're talking to somebody that speaks English, that appointment's going to take a lot less time. So when you're scheduling, anytime you're scheduling an appointment that needs an interpreter, be aware of that and make sure you allow enough time. Be sure to always face and talk directly to the participant. Do not talk to the interpreter and then let them, they're going to interpret. That's what they do, their experience, they know how to do that. So you should be talking to the participant. You should talk to a participant who does not speak English, and you're using an interpreter for the same way you would talk to someone or interact with someone who speaks English or whatever language. If you're bilingual, I don't mean to leave you out. So if you're bilingual and you speak Spanish and you're talking to somebody, you would do the same thing with someone who spoke Kurdish and you were using an interpreter. And also don't say, ask them this, XYZ. Don't say that. You should just say, something like, does Sammy take a multivitamin? Because you're talking directly to the person, the participant or the authorized rep. Also, use their name. Do not refer to them as her or she, which again comes when you're talking to the interpreter and asking them to translate what you're saying. That's why they're there. They know they should be doing that. So you don't want to say, well, she needs to do this. Just say, like you were, phrase it like you were actually talking to that person with no interpreter, no one else around. Use a normal tone or pace. When you're speaking, you don't have to speak louder. You don't have to speak slower at all, because the interpreter, if they aren't able to keep up or if they don't hear what you said, they will ask you to repeat it or to slow down or to, if you're going too fast. The only time that might change is one example is if you have something that's very in-depth and long, such as the rights and responsibilities. You might ask, you might have to slow down so that because it's a lot to translate, and use shorter sentences or shorter, stop every sentence or something and let them translate. Because again, when you're using a translator, you don't want to be talking over them. They don't want to be translating. They don't want to be saying what you just said and then you're saying something else, because it's, it'd be like having two different conversations and you were trying to follow that. So you don't want to do that. Also, don't use slang or acronyms. And, we all know WIC has a lot of those. So we have to, even normally, we have to be careful that we don't use a lot of those. And especially when someone doesn't speak English. Pause. Again, I already mentioned that. Pause when you have something like long with like the rights and responsibilities, for example. Don't forget when you're working with an interpreter that they're going to interpret everything that they hear. So don't have side conversations. Don't say things that you might not, be careful and keep in mind that they're going to interpret whatever they hear. And then encourage some two-way conversation, just like you would with any other participant. And it's okay to ask, is there anything else you'd like me to know? Or do you have any questions for me? Did I answer all of your questions? Those are, the interpreter, it's fine to be doing that. And I think we see many times that staff forget about that. They don't think about that, especially because these appointments take so much longer. And then also, you have to be patient when you're using an interpreter, because it will take more time and the visit's going to be longer. So just be patient. That sometimes is hard when you have other appointments waiting or your clinic gets really busy. But we want to be able to have and give those participants who need translators, or we have to use translators, the same amount of service or information that we would anyone else. Next slide, Jackie. So we're going to look at a video now, and this is about sign language interpreters. And this is one that I think everyone has the least experience with in working with sign language interpreters or are deaf or hard of hearing participants. So we're going to watch this short video. So Jackie, if you want to start it, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
We know that feeling of uncertainty. You've learned that you will be interacting with a deaf coworker, customer, or patient, but have no idea what that entails. You're unsure about how to respectfully communicate with a deaf person, and you're likely nervous about the addition of an interpreter. Whether this is your first time using a sign language interpreter or you're a seasoned ADA pro, here are 5 simple pointers to ensure your event is an inclusive one. Tip number 1. Speak and look directly at the deaf individual.
Tell him that I got his lab results and everything seems to be fine.
Can you identify what this doctor did incorrectly? You're right. She neither looked at nor talked directly to her deaf patient. Ouch. Could you imagine how uncomfortable it might feel to be a sick patient in that position? Now let's see how the interaction could have gone better.
Hi, I got your lab results and everything seems to be fine.
Now that's much better. The doctor is looking at her patient and addressing them directly. Now a more trusting connection is formed between the two individuals. Tip number 2. Prepare your interpreter. This second word of advice helps ensure communication goes smoothly. If you are planning a presentation, class, or workshop, it is vital to prepare your interpreter by sending preparation materials to ICS at least 1 week prior to your service date. Presentation materials ensure your interpreters understand and have translations prepared for the content you intend to present. Materials can include an agenda, PowerPoint, biography, video clip, or a song that will be used or presented on the date of your request. Similarly, it is important to remember interpreters often work in multiple fields, sometimes even in the same day. Acronyms and terminology from one field are often different from that of another, so it is a time-saving practice to brief your interpreter on any industry-specific jargon you intend to use to avoid confusion or clarifications later. Tip number 3. Position the interpreter clearly. Ensure that the interpreter is positioned next to the primary speaker with an unobstructed view of the deaf participant. No need to ask what went wrong this time. The presenter clearly forgot an interpreter was present, obstructing the view and participation of her deaf colleague. Now let's see how that could have gone better. Terrific! The presenter remembered an interpreter was in the room and considerately waited for an appropriate moment before obstructing her colleague's view. Tip number 4. The interpreter is not a messenger or recorder. Interpreters are not messengers, meaning you should not ask the interpreter to tell any deaf or hearing participants something at a later time. Similarly, interpreters are not recorders, so you should not ask the interpreter to recall something said during a previous conversation or event. Interpreters adhere to a strict code of professional conduct and confidentiality. Asking an interpreter to act in either of these ways places the interpreter in a conflicting situation. Let's take a look at what we mean.
Where'd he go? Just tell me at the 3 o'clock meeting this afternoon.
Oops, did you catch the mistake there? The presenter asked the interpreter to pass along a message to her deaf colleague who wasn't present in the room. This places serious liability on the interpreter that extends outside their professional role. What's worse, if the message isn't delivered, the absent deaf colleague could face the unfortunate consequences of their coworker's poor decision. Now let's see what could have gone better.
Oh, he already left. I'll wait and give him my message.
Well done. The employee recognized that her colleague wasn't available and approached the situation in the same way she would with her other colleagues. Tip number 5. Speak at a normal pace. We know it can be nerve-wracking giving a presentation next to someone who is processing every word you say. Remember to relax and speak at a normal pace. Interpreters are trained professionals capable of keeping up with even the fastest or most articulate speakers. If any interpreter feels you are speaking too quickly, they will respectfully let you know.
Hello everyone. I became fascinated by marketing in college. The concept of personal branding and what it could do for me.
Well, that was awkward. The presenter is clearly uncomfortable and unfamiliar with how interpreters work. Let's see a better approach.
A little information about me. I became fascinated by marketing in college, especially the concept of personal branding and what it could do for me.
Now there's a confident presenter who knows how to use an interpreter. There you have it. In just 5 quick tips, you learned how to effectively work with a sign language interpreter. Still have lingering questions? Don't worry, simply visit inclusiveasl.com to view answers to frequently asked questions, read up on our informational blog posts, watch additional videos, or to shoot us a message. Rest assured that ICS is committed to being your informational resource for equal access and inclusion. The world awaits you. Be included.
Thanks, Jackie. This video, like I said, didn't really, isn't specific for WIC clinics, but of the tips and the hints that they gave, even though they were talking about workplace or teaching, those kinds of things really do apply to what you would need to know to work with an interpreter in the clinic. So, keep that in mind. Take the gist of those tips when you have to work with a sign language interpreter. And hopefully that will make things a little more comfortable for you because, it is a whole different type of interpretation. And it's, none of us across the state experience or have to use those. sign language interpreters very often. Two of the main tips that I always try to remember is the one where they talked about that you need to have a clear, the person who's who your work, the patient or the client or participant, they need to have a clear line of sight to the interpreter, and you shouldn't get in the way. And the other thing is make sure the room has is well lit, because if you have a really dark room, again, it would be the same as if you stood in front of the interpreter or stood between the interpreter and the client. So those are two big things that I think are very simple and easy to do. So, and then at the bottom here on the slide is a link to the Nebraska Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. There it is to their website. There's a tremendous amount of information on there about sign language, the interpreters, interpreting services, and a lot of Q&As. So it's just another resource that is out there for you, and I wanted to make you aware of it because their site is very, very good. The next thing I wanted to talk about as far as interpreters, and it's one that not everyone has had to use, but as I mentioned, sometimes you don't see, you can't have interpreters and bilingual staff at your agency if you only see, out of 98 languages. We can't have someone who speaks all 98 in our clinics or on staff. So there are definitely times where we have to use an outside service. And I know a lot of you use the language line. And it's a little different for using interpreters over the phone versus those that are right there in person or someone who's bilingual and that's on staff and that understands WIC. I think the first thing you have to remember in working with someone from the language line or over the phone is that this may be their first experience with WIC. So you may have to do a little more explaining. You may have to talk a little slower. But I've included as one of the handouts, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I've included a handout, and this comes from Language Line, and it is tips and hints for using an interpreter over the phone when you use, and this is regardless of it's their you're using their service or another phone interpretation service or interpreter service. These tips will work for anyone. So I wanted to give that to you so that you can use it. Some of you are very comfortable and very used to using the phone for interpreters, but you also, some others aren't. One other thing that I know Language Line allows, and I know some of the other language, like that phone language providers, is they will provide, or they have sign language interpreters. Now you would have to do this over video, and your participant would watch the screen. But that is a service, if you ever need it, that you might look at. There are also interpreters on that the Nebraska site for deaf and hard of hearing. So next is WIC is protection for people with disabilities. And WIC is required to provide protections for all of those who apply for and participate in the program at our clinics. So what is the definition of disabilities? It's anybody who's considered to have a disability, or anyone is considered to have a disability when they have a physical or mental impairment that affects one or more of the major life activities on a daily basis. So there doesn't have to be a record of this. We don't have to see proof of this in order for us or someone to feel like, or we need to provide or treat them as they have a disability. Many times I get asked, well, what does major life activity mean? What is that? And that is a function like walking or seeing or hearing, being able to work being able to cook or take a bath or shower, anything like that that is hindered so that they can't perform those actions without either a tremendous amount of difficulty or they have to have help to do that. And though, because those are all considered major life activities, and they're considered disabled if they're not able to do those or they need help doing those. And one example is breathing. It's considered a major life ability. And you know, think about how someone with an oxygen machine, they have those little portable ones that they have to, you know, that they can take with them, which is awesome. But if they have the ones where it's a tank and they're on wheels, think about your clinics and how would they get in if they had to pull one of those or bring one of those with them? Would there be room for them to get in and out? Would there be room in your small area? Would there be space in your room in the clinic for them, any children that they might bring with them, the machine, and you? So keep that in mind when you're looking at your clinic sites, because, you know, people with disabilities, and if they have aids or disability aids, that means more room that they're going to need. So just something to keep in mind. Next slide. The definition of what is a disability was expanded some years ago, and to include all of the things listed here on this slide. Whoops, go back one slide, Jackie. Oh, sorry. There we go. I didn't catch that. I'm sorry. And these are all, as you can see when you look at them and read them, all of these are hidden. That unless they tell us that these are going on or they have these, we'd never know about these, and we wouldn't know that this person is considered to have a disability. So just want you to always keep in mind that just because someone is not in a wheelchair or they can see, but maybe they have very limited vision or, you know, or any of those other very, very obvious disabilities, they may have one of these hidden ones and they are still considered to be disabled in that respect. And we have to provide access to them, and we have to think about our clinics and as to how, you know, any of these things, how that might impact their being able to come or be in our clinics. Next one. So now we're going to talk about reasonable accommodations, and looking at your clinic locations and thinking about what would they limit someone with a disability from, would they limit someone who has a disability from applying, or they've already come once or twice and then they never came back because it was just too difficult. So evaluating your clinics and making them accessible, that is what's known as reasonable accommodation. And this is required for all WIC clinics by all the disability rules. So when you're choosing a new WIC clinic site, you should consider how far does someone have to walk from the parking lot to the WIC area? Is there adequate parking? Where do all the entrances and exits, where are those in relation to your clinic areas? Do the entrances allow for, you know, for say a mom with a stroller and two small children to get in easily, you know, so they can open the door and enter? Is that because, you know, we don't have just one person coming through usually. It's usually someone, an adult with more than one child, or someone handling us, you know, trying to get a small child in and carrying a car seat with a baby. Are there steps to get to the entrance? How far from the WIC area is the restrooms? Do the restrooms have enough room for moms and children and babies all at once? How many hallways does someone have to go walk through to get from the entrance to the WIC area? And then think about too, and this is not as common, but if you have someone that does not see, that can't see well or is blind, will the site allow you to put up a Braille sign at the front door or somewhere close that they could use that tells them where they need to go to find the clinic their first or second time that they come? to the clinic. After that, like anyone else, they would know right to go. But you can put up a sign to point arrows and things, but they're not going to be able to see it. So think about that too. Next slide. Another piece of accommodations is making reasonable modifications. And this can mean, as I said, having the braille signage, but it also can mean using large print signs, because someone may not be blind, they may just have low vision and not be able to see regular print, to let them know where to go in the building. Another one is we have to allow service animals into the clinics. And again, I don't know how many of you know this or how many times you've experienced service animals, but if someone tells you that it is a service animal, you have to allow them to bring it into the clinic. They do not have to show proof, and they do not have to wear like a dog, they don't have to have a vest on that says I am a service animal. Some will, but not all. And it doesn't mean they're not a service animal. If they say they are, we have to take their word for it. You can arrange alternate arrangements for the service. And again, all clinics should have wheelchair accessibility. So not just getting in the doors and through the hallways, but also being able to move around the clinic space. So we have a client situation here. You have a new family that called for an appointment. Grandma who is calling you tells you if she's calling for mom, and she tells you that mom is deaf. This is the only family in your area who has a member who's deaf. What would you do before the appointment? Would you ask them if grandma can come with mom to the appointment to sign for her? Would you do nothing and just have your staff speak slowly and use hand gestures and pointing? Would you find and have a sign language interpreter available for the appointment? Or would you use printed materials, because this is the only client that you have who is deaf and they can read? So if you use the printed materials, they can read those materials for themselves. If you said A, that's okay. It's not the best option, but if grandma's willing to do that and available to come and sign, you could ask her to do that. But remember I said, a sign language or someone to sign is considered the same as any other interpreter. And we have to also let them know that we will provide an interpreter for them free of charge. So, or if grandma says she's working and she can't come, then we have to take that and find another solution. Having staff speak slowly and use hand gestures, that's not a good idea. There's lots that's missed and just doesn't provide a good visit or a good service, and we should never do that. Find and have a sign language interpreter available for the appointment. That is the best option, and that's what you should do. Using printed materials and having them read it, that is also is not a good choice. We should, because we are required to provide interpreters. Another situation is the only location, you're in a small town, and the only location you can have a WIC clinic in this town is in the basement of a building, and it doesn't have an elevator. So what could you do to serve clients with a physical disability that want to come to this clinic? Staff could carry or help them up and down the stairs to get to the clinic. Or second option, you could ask the client to go to the next closest WIC clinic. Thirdly, you could find an area on the ground level that WIC can use temporarily when you have somebody with a disability. Or the last option is move the clinic to another community. So what do you think? Option to help carry them up and down the stairs or wherever to get to the WIC clinic. You should never, ever use this option. Don't even consider it. It literally is against all of the rules and can get you in trouble. So never, ever do that. Don't even consider it. of asking the client to go to the nearest WIC clinic, you can do that. That is not the best option, but it is an option if there are no, you don't have any other options. That is a possibility. C is find an area on the ground level that WIC can use temporarily for that appointment. And that really is the best option because they're calling or they want to come to the clinic in that community. So we need to make every effort we can to allow them to do that. And sometimes, even though your clinic, we try to have all our clinics, that's one of the rules, they have to be handicap accessible. But every once in a while, we really need to have a clinic in a certain community and there's just nothing available. Or maybe we've lost our site and we're still trying to find one and we have to find a temporary site that doesn't meet all of the rules. So you can find, if you can find a separate or another location or the landlord or the building will let you use a room on the ground floor for that appointment, that's what you should do. And ultimately, if you cannot find one and you have a lot of clients and those who are disabled, you may have to look at moving the clinic to another community. Now I'm going to talk about those WIC. Remember I mentioned there's these new requirements, and there are some new WIC website requirements for limited English proficiency people and disabilities. And they do apply to all government entities and those who receive WIC or federal funds. And so that would mean WIC. What these new or these requirements say is that we need to ensure that our website content is accessible to all users, including those with disabilities. And in order to do that, we have to follow the WIC accessibility guidelines. And the abbreviation is there on the slide for future if you need. There are some implementation dates of when these have to be in place, and they are for anyone whose population that they serve or in their area that they serve is 50,000 or more. You have to meet these by next April 24th of 2026. For areas that are serving populations that are less than 50,000, or so your service area has less than 50,000 people, then that's extended to to 2027. So April 26th of 2027. So there is plenty of time. Your IT folks are going to know about this, and you can kind of reach out to them. But generally, some of the requirements for these changes or these or for your websites are that there are alternatives for your images and videos. So for example, you have some text, you have a picture or an image, and there's text that explains what that image is, because someone that can't see is not going to be able to see that image. So text that would then read, or that a screen reader could verbalize, would meet that requirement. It would also allow closed captioning of videos, just like you do on the TV, closed captioning for people that can't hear. There's also rules in there about what colors to use to be sure you have the right contrast for low vision or color blindness. Certain colors people can't see, obviously, and if they have color blindness issues. It also says that you have to be able to, people have to be able to move around your website using just the keyboard, and that it needs to, the way you move or the keys that you use have to be consistent from page to page on your website. So those are just some of the things. And like I said, your IT folks are going to know more about this, but you might want to reach out to them and say, hey, did they know this? And let them know that WIC is required to follow or comply with those rules. Next slide. One of the other areas that WIC has to comply with or has to do is we have to follow or be sure that we follow the rules that are out there that ensure protections for faith-based organizations who provide programs or provide space for programs to use that are receiving federal money. and WIC falls into that category. So next slide. So what that does is it allows WIC to use space in temples, churches, synagogues, mosques, any other faith-based buildings without having to remove religious art or symbols during the clinics. And since we have somewhere between about a third of all of our clinics, especially in our smaller towns and more rural parts of the state, most of those clinics are in churches or some kind of religious building. And we are allowed to do that, and we don't have to cover up religious pictures. We don't have to cover up crosses or take them down. We can have our clinics in those buildings without doing any of that. And that's really, really important considering how many clinics we have in religious buildings. And so we can talk about public notification next. And this is an area that's misunderstood by a lot of staff. It is a requirement in the rules and all the regs for WIC. And we're going to talk about what parts of public notification, what the parts of public notification are, and how we meet those in WIC. The first one, there are several, this slide shows all the different components of public notice that WIC has to, or that we have to do, and we're going to talk about how we do each of these. So first of all, there is an outreach. Y'all have all heard of outreach, but there's one piece of the outreach that's considered outreach that we have to do every year and we're required, and that is to notify the public and participants of any changes to the clinic days or hours. So we have to let them know that. And then, so that's throughout the year, whenever that happens. The other piece is that once a year, we have to let or publish or let everyone in your area know about the WIC eligibility criteria. So what makes people eligible? Who might be eligible? What are the benefits that WIC provides? We have to let them know about the address, the days, hours of clinics. And all of this, these notices need to include the non-discrimination statement. And talking about the non-discrimination statement, another part of the public notification is that we have to notify or let people know that WIC does not discriminate against any of those protected classes. And in general, the program does not discriminate. One of the ways we do that is displaying the "And Justice for All" poster, which has the non-discrimination statement on it, in our clinics, either in a waiting area or another area where all applicants, participants are able to see it and read it if they choose to. That also means if you're having participants come into an administrative area of your agency or your clinic, the poster needs to be there. If that might be the only place that they're going to access. You do not need to have multiple posters as long as you have one in a general area where anyone entering or exiting the clinic or the area would be able to see it. The version is shown here, the one that you should have, and it's dated. It has September 2019 as its date. So many of you that have been with WIC for a while will remember this is the one we've had for quite a while, and that's the one we still will continue to use. So as I said, non-discrimination statement. We have a new version, and funny enough, it matches what's on that green "And Justice for All" poster I showed you. As many of you remember, about 3 years ago, we had to change it, and we had to add some additional language. Now that language has been removed, so we get to keep using the same poster, which makes everything simpler. But when do we use it? When do we have to use that non-discrimination statement other than on the posters? And it is required on anything, whether it's print or electronic, that has an outreach message or has information about WIC benefits and services. So that's most of our materials, most of the things that we do. It is not required and does not need to be on any nutrition education materials. There is a short version. The short version can be used on small items like postcards or social media, because as you know, the non-discrimination statement, the long one is long. It's like a page. Well, if you try to put that on a social media post or a postcard, it's really not going to work. And so we want to do that. So as you can see, here's what it looks like, and this is now on the WIC website. So it has been updated. It has been will be updated on the participant rights and responsibilities. And also when we get all the translations, the new version will be part of those translations. So what we did, or what the change is on the long statement, we removed gender identity and sexual orientation. So that's all that was changed. Everything else is exactly the same. And the short statement, it's exactly the same as it was. So literally the only change is just removing the gender identity and sexual orientation words. So again, just to give you kind of an update on the status of update on the non-discrimination changes. As I said, there's a new version on the website. We will be translating the rights and responsibilities into 6 languages in addition to English, and they're being updated for the new change and should be on the website and available by the 1st of October. And then, as I said, the civil rights poster, we already have those. You should have those available. You should have been using those. And it's the green one. And if you're not quite sure if you have the right one, check the date on the bottom and it will say, if it says September 2019, you've got the right one. If you're using or have anything other than that green one posted in your clinic, you need to take those down and dispose of them. Just wanted to make a quick note that when we're talking about diversity or non-discrimination, we have to think about the images that we use on our materials, on our websites, social media, any other written materials, and they must reflect the diversity that you see in your service area. So just always keep in mind when you're doing those things or choosing things that the pictures or the photos or images on those need to show and reflect the diversity. Next slide. So I have a question here for you. You're developing a list of your clinic dates for 2026, and you're going to post these in the counties you serve. Does that need to have the non-discrimination statement included? Yes, maybe, depending on where you're going to post it, or no. What do you think? And the answer is yes. It needs to have the non-discrimination statement on it. It doesn't matter where you're going to post it. It needs to have it on it. The caveat is you don't have to put the long, full page long one. You can use the short statement on this, on something like this. So next slide. And we're going to talk about complaints. We never want to get those, and we never get those, right? But as we know, that's not always true. Next slide, Jackie. As hard as we try to be fair and treat everybody the same, there's going to be times when someone will feel they've been treated unfairly. So keep in mind that everyone has a right to file a complaint, even when you don't think the complaint is valid or you know that no one intended to exclude them or treat them differently. We still have to accept those complaints because, you know, at any time, any one of us could be approached by someone, a disgruntled participant or someone else that we need. So we all need to know the process for filing a complaint when this happens. So we're going to discuss that. Next slide. Okay. Talk about the first thing is that complaints are considered to be discrimination complaints if the person says or alleges that they were treated differently because of any of those protected classes or bases I talked about earlier, and you all remember those, the race, sex, national origin, all of those, disability, etc. If you're not sure if it's a discrimination complaint or not, send it to the WIC office anyway. We will send it on to USDA, and USDA can make that decision. It's not up to us to make that decision. Anyone making a complaint can give it to you. They can give it to you in writing. They can tell you verbally, and you write it down for them, or they can call the state WIC office and tell us about their concern and complaint. And then we will, again, submit it and send it off to USDA. They also can choose to remain anonymous. But if you have someone that says that, let them know that we would never give their name to anyone who the complaint's about. And if someone is still reluctant to give their name and contact information, let them know that the information will only be used if the person investigating or following up on their complaint needs additional information. Again, tell them it's not going to be given to anyone who the complaint is about. And I think that's something they worry about. In my experience, that's something they always worry about. And once you reassure them of that, then they're like, oh, okay. And then once we submit a discrimination complaint to USDA, they are the ones, as I said, who decide if it applies to WIC and whether it's discriminatory or not. So these discrimination complaints, or these complaints, they have to include certain things for USDA to be able to use them and follow up on them. So the investigator needs to know the person who's making the report's name and their contact information. The complaint should contain a description of what happened and why they feel they or whoever, someone else was discriminated against. Also, it needs to include the date or dates when this happened. And that's important because all discrimination complaints have to be filed or submitted within 180 days of when the incident happened. So there's a time frame about that. And the complaint also has to include the location where the incident or where it happened at and who was involved and if there's any witnesses. So there's quite a few pieces that we need to collect if someone's issuing a complaint or filing a complaint. There is a requirement that all discrimination complaints must be sent to the state office within 5 days of the time we receive it. So if someone does a complaint and you think, but even if you're not sure that it's a that it falls into, discrimination mode or area, send it to us anyway. And we need to get that within 5 days. And either you or the person making the complaint can submit one using any of the options shown here. So you can call us and do it verbally. They can email it, which we do get emails at this email address. It's our general state or, WIC email. They can mail it, write it down and mail it, or you can. And a new feature, the number one on the list, and that hasn't happened yet. It will be available in October, is we will have a complaint form. We have a complaint form now, but we're going to have something new where you choose the button. What it was showing was the website, our main page, and down at the bottom there's a button right now that says report. I think it's report WIC fraud is the actual words. And that we're going to change the verbiage on that to say report WIC fraud or a complaint to, do a complaint. And we're not sure of the exact word yet, but yes, there's the button. And so we'll have a button right here in this area. It may look a little different. We're still working with the people that do that. But they can go, either you can go there when you have a complaint and click on it. If someone doesn't, they want to tell you and have you send it in, you can just go click on this button and you can type in the information, hit submit, and it will come right to the state WIC office. Now, we will be talking about this more and showing you more, and this area will be used for discrimination complaints and all other complaints. So I'm pretty excited about it. And it also takes the place of those 5 different complaint forms that we used to have out there. We're going to have one form that will take care of everything. Keep your ears open, keep your eyes open. We're going to talk more. We're going to have more information about that coming up, but we hope to have it in place and ready to use sometime in October. But I wanted to share with you, there is kind of a golden rule for complaints, and that is never to discourage anyone from filing a complaint or voicing or telling you an allegation of discrimination. We have to and should always accept all of the complaints that we get. It also is something that if you see as a participant and you see something going on that as far as discriminatory or something, then you can also submit a complaint or turn in a complaint. It isn't just participants or the general public. It is also staff. So that's all I have. We got through that whole long list of bullet points and other information that I showed you at the beginning that USDA requires be a part of this. And yes, that is all I have. So now I guess we have about 10 minutes. If you would like to ask any questions, you can come off mute and ask, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability, or you can put the questions in the chat. I see a lot of you put your names and your agencies as far as for the attendance in here already, so thank you for doing that. That's awesome. Not seeing any questions though. So hopefully that means that I covered it all and it wasn't too confusing. And again, like I said, for those of you that have heard this many times over the years, I hope it wasn't too boring. And thank you for bearing with us and listening again. I appreciate it. So Jackie, did you have anything you wanted to share or let them know?
Not that I can think of. Marge, I think you were pretty thorough on everything. You did a really nice job with that. That was a lot of information. If anyone, I don't see any questions coming in, and I know it's been a long presentation. So if you think of something later, feel free to send an email to Marge, and we can include any of those answers in a follow-up email if you think of something. And I will go ahead and send out, I know it's getting late now, but I will send this survey link out so that to make sure you can have a chance to get feedback on the survey. So we would appreciate your help in your feedback on that.
Oh, and also we will be sending out the recording. It may be a few days because it takes time sometimes to get that, ready and in a format that we can send it or that you can view it. So we will be sending that out.
Oh, there you go. There's a survey link. If you have time to do it before you leave, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, you can do it later. But we do appreciate your feedback. Make sure you pick, there's a date picker on there. So you have to make sure that you put the date for today's survey or today's webinar. So on this date picker, then you just pick 8/21, the civil rights date when you get to that part. So I have this all set up so that we can collect information all on one survey. So, okay, regardless of what. Yep, you just have to pick which date that, which webinar you're on. So. All right, thank you so much. Appreciate it. We will stay on just for a few more minutes in case some questions come in. But if you are, you're free to go if you need to. Thank you for joining us and have a great day.